You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on a very special Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is former United States Senator Dan Coats. He has held many positions, many in elective office and in the federal government. Most recently, he was Director of National Intelligence. And he's here today to talk about his career. But we're going to start with what's going on with Russia and the Ukraine. Dan, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Well, Robert, thank you for asking me to be on. Chance to talk to Hoosiers is been a big part of my life, and the opportunity to do it now, even though I've stepped down from public service, it's a privilege.
Well, let me say a couple of things very quickly so I don't get yelled at by all my friends. First off, you asked me to call you Dan, so I'm doing so, or I would not. Of course, I could call you Staff Sergeant since that's your rank in the United States Army. And I should also say that working for Dan Coats was the very first job I ever had in politics in 1992. I started off at the very top. You will find no more honest, humble, and true Hoosier public servant than Dan Coats. So thank you again for coming on.
Well, that's nice words that you've said. Thank you. I just appreciate the opportunity.
So one of your stops on your public service career is something that people may not know, and that is you were ambassador to Germany from the United States from 2001 to 2005. You were very interested in foreign relations and foreign affairs in your time in the United States Senate, along with your colleague, Senator Richard Lugar. And as I mentioned, you served for a few years as Director of National Intelligence in the Trump administration. So let me give you some time and you can just assess from your perspective what's happening in the Ukraine right now.
Well, we're all glued, at least I'm glued to the media that's giving us what's happening right now. It's so fluid, it's hard to almost keep up with. It is astounding to me that the Ukrainians have stood up like no one thought that they would. Their president, who was a former entertainment, came from the entertainment circle and reminded you of Ronald Reagan came out of entertainment. This person, they said, well, he's not going to be up to dealing with Ukraine and being a president and so forth and so on. He's a world hero right now for the way he has stood up for his country. The media attention that has been focused, the condemnation of what the Russians have done and are doing, nations that never wanted to test Russia or have any engagement with that might affect their economy or whatever, are stepping up. The world is stepping up, seeing the real the reality of Putin. He was a KGB head over in Eastern Germany before the wall came down, head of the KGB, calculating, power-hungry, lying president leading USSR. We see demonstrations in Russia against Putin. This could be potentially a game changer, and I say but because Russia has massed a massive army and military equipment on all the borders, trying to encircle Kiev, and with the force that they have against a determined but far less capable force of the Ukrainians. But what they've done so far has drawn attention to this, and what's going to happen next, it's just hour to hour. And what kind of response is Putin going to make, being that his military has been failing and not doing what he thought he'd do? He thought they would walk in there in 24 hours, they would have control of that government. And I think the silver lining to all of this, and I'll stop talking right after that, the silver lining of all of this is that it's a wake-up call to NATO, a wake-up call to democratic nations around the world, but particularly in Europe, that democracy is something you cannot take for granted. You have to be prepared. You have to be strong. You have to stay with it because autocrats and others want to take you down. And so this is a real test here in terms of free nations against authoritarian ruled nations, and who's going to come out on top. And there has been some lagging and some taking for granted that's been going across with NATO spending the money they need to spend. But right now, I think everybody's saying, okay, game on. We got to get our game together, and we're going to unite and do it together and expose what Russia is trying to do.
You mentioned wake-up call. Let's start with Germany. Just earlier, a few hours ago, actually, before the recording of this podcast, the Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, announced that Germany will spend more than 2% of its economic output on military spending. This has been written about in the news as a tremendous watershed event, not only for Germany, but for the NATO alliance. How do you see it?
Well, you said it. Germany was not standing up to what their responsibilities were, being the largest and best and most military capable country of NATO. We've been pressing them for years and years and years to fulfill their what they said they would do, and spending 2% of their GDP on military, but they never got to that point. Interestingly enough, the Conservative Party, CSU, under Angela Merkel, who was a great leader, but they did not really step up as they should, I think, thinking that, well, maybe keep some kind of relationship with Russia. We still like to sell Mercedes and tools and so forth to Russians, and maybe that's the best way to go. A lot of people were saying, including us, that no, Putin only responds to strength. He will only back down when we see that somebody else has the strength to stand up to him. This flip here on Germany is amazing because their new chancellor is part of the SPD, and that was the party in Germany closest to Russia. The former chancellor before Merkel was hand in hand with Russia over the pipeline. He took position chairing Gazprom, the major gas company in Russia. He's been criticized for selling Germany out and so forth. So the new chancellor now, from that very same party closest to Russia, has stood up, and it's about time, but good for them. That is a huge step forward. And I just learned about an hour ago that the Swiss, who never said they would let anybody else worry about whose money was going where, froze Russian money and froze oligarchs' money and all of that. And that's a first. And so this is going around the world here, and it is amazing. It's in terms of what we might see happen.
Switzerland also closed its airspace, and you mentioned a few minutes ago about a wake-up call.
Yep.
There are some other kind of breaking news. This is being recorded on Monday, February 28th, and we hope to post it this evening so that everyone can hear what you have to say. We're talking to former United States Senator Dan Coates. Sweden announced it was sending 5,000 anti-tank missile systems to the Ukraine. Finland is sending weapons to the Ukraine. I mean, Scandinavian countries who for centuries, quite frankly, have been neutral in one way or the other. What does it tell you, and what does your experience tell you when countries like this have decided to step in some way that Putin has erred so badly that these countries have decided that, you know what, we can't just stand aside like maybe we have in previous conflicts?
Yes, I mean, this is clearly something that we've for years wanted to happen, but has not happened, when these Baltic nations and others have basically said, yeah, we want to be with you, but we're not going to join NATO, or we're going to play neutral and everything will be okay. This has been a wake-up call for them also, and they're responding to this, sends a major message, I think, to the Russians and to the rest of the world that we're in a change position, and democracy is vulnerable, and it's being attacked by those who don't support free enterprise and freedom of the press and freedom to live in a country without a strong man telling them what to do. And so this could potentially turn out to be a major game changer in terms of, we've been just talking about the declining democracies. This could be the thing that makes them stand up and show the world that this is what a democracy looks like, and this is what an autocracy like Russia and others are trying to undermine and submit to their people of different countries, that it's better to go their way than our way. So it could be a major game changer.
So much of what passes between Russia and other countries in Europe involves energy, and Russia has not shrunk at all from raising the specter of cutting off European access to their natural gas and other energy sources. And I'm not exactly sure of the dates here, so I'm going to ask this very quickly. Were you involved in some of the discussions and advising European powers, especially in Germany, through your role as ambassador from the United States with regard to the Nord Stream 2 system that the current German chancellor has seemed to have maybe perhaps backed away from a little bit?
Yes, I was engaged presenting the U.S. view to the Russians with their people who were engaging in foreign policy, engaging in economic policy, trade policy, and you mentioned the energy issues. I thought from the beginning, and we in the United States thought from the beginning, that dealing with Russia is something that the Germans should not do. Their chancellor sold them out on it, and Merkel did not correct it. Thought one of her things that she did many good things, but one thing that I didn't agree with. But I took our messages to the Germans to basically say, look, it's not just Germany, it's the eastern countries where the pipelines from Russia go through. Russia can shut those down, and if they want to, and we have to look at this issue in terms of not just what's good for Germany, but what's good for the entire EU. Those that have been released and freed when the wall came down have moved toward Western democracy and who joined NATO are now perilously put in a place where Russia can shut off their heat in the winter and their cooling in the summer, and the essentials needed to have energy. Now that's a challenge for us that we could have better met, in my opinion, that if Congress and President Biden would have issued a support for the Keystone Pipeline. It wasn't all that long ago, 3 or 4 years ago, when through drilling and all of the new oil fields we had found in the Dakotas and Texas and so forth, I still remember the day the headline came out, the U.S. now is free from any outside influence. We can energize through our own processes all the gas and oil that we need to run our country. That didn't last very long because the shutdown fulfilling the Keystone Pipeline completion, nothing's coming through there now. And basically, and there are some climate issues, but basically shutting down the drilling that was taking place in the Dakotas. That puts us in a situation where we could have been in a much better position, particularly implying and helping Europe to get oil from other sources. So once again, lessons learned, but sometimes too late.
President Biden's Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, recently said that, quote, Germany is the best friend the U.S. has in the world, close quote. Do you agree with this? And is what's happening over in Ukraine with Russia's invasion only strengthen this relationship?
Well, it's always been a key issue, a key nation of Europe, along with the United Kingdom, in terms of relationships and support. The Germans did hide behind their not wanting to over-engage or do some of the things that we thought we needed them to do, particularly in terms of Iraq, particularly relative to some of the things the Russians were doing, and on this Nord Stream 2 pipeline. But this wake-up call for them has, I think, turned the tide. That relationship has always been good on a business side and a foreign policy side, but there were some things that the Germans and their counterparts, and their nations around them could have been doing, but put economic trade and so forth ahead of the need for a strong military and a strong standing up in terms of what was happening in Russia.
We should say that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is built to transport natural gas into the European Union because of the massive reserves located in Russia. One of the stories, there are many stories of Ukrainian resilience, from its president all the way down to just the grassroots. I read an article earlier today, and I think this will maybe give you a chuckle, Dan, and that is Ukrainian breweries have stopped making alcohol and are using their facilities to make Molotov cocktails. What does that tell you?
You know, that tells me that the Ukrainians are one really tough people who love their country and are going to do anything they can, including taking a former bottle of vodka and turning it into a Molotov cocktail so that they can stand by and throw that out against a Russian tank or group of Russians or whatever. I mean, it is like David and Goliath here in terms of what's happening in Ukraine. And no one 4 or 5 days ago thought that the Russians would be stymied at this particular point in time. And hopefully there can be some retreat. And my concern is that Putin is so, he thinks in such a way that, he can't afford to lose. or be ridiculed or be condemned, but that is what is happening. He's seeing protests in his own country, and but he's a strong man with almost an obsession about the nations that have once been part of the USSR and now are free nations after the wall came down. And so if he wants to, he's got just by force the ability, I think, to take over Ukraine, but it would be a ruined just, it would be devastated if he did that. And if he would sacrifice a lot of Russian lives, their army isn't up to what they think it is. And we're seeing the holes and seeing the limitations that they have had and the problems that they've had. But by true mass of force and the number of troops they have, the number of equipment they have and missiles and so forth, is awfully hard for a country like Ukraine to overcome. But if there is enough pressure against what the consequences would be to Putin and to the Russia Federation, perhaps that would cause him to walk off some ramp here and try to back off, claiming that grab some land, or I don't know, whatever is going to happen there. I'm concerned that Putin might go ahead and just say, the heck with it all, we're going to blast through there. But he's got the world looking at him, and we'll see what happens.
Have you ever met Vladimir Putin or President Zelensky? And even if you haven't, what do you think is going through their minds right now? You just talked a little bit about Putin, so maybe concentrate on Zelensky. But have you ever met either one of them and had a chance to take your measure of them?
I've talked to a lot of Russian officials, but I've never had a direct talk with Putin and not met Zelensky. I continued to be director of national intelligence in these last 2 years, I would have been in Ukraine with him. I've had interaction with intelligence services in Russia, basically meeting with them to say, look, we have very few things in common. We understand that how you have tried to influence our elections. We know what you're doing, and we know you're going to continue doing it, and we're going to continue to keep you, counter you. But can I ask you of one thing? Will you do one thing? Both of us have one thing in common, and that is we don't want to harm our own people. And with the terrorism that is taking place around the world, there's terrorism efforts going on in Russia, and there's terrorism efforts going on against the United States. Can't we at least inform each other if we hear of something that may happen? And let me give you, I was speaking now to the head of their intelligence agency, and both their military and civil. I said, let me give you an example. We learned that Russia at St. Petersburg is going to be under a terrorist attack that would take many, many lives. We passed that on to you, and you got that information an hour before that happened, and you were able to stifle it from happening. We would like you to reciprocate if you find any kind of intelligence that would harm Americans, and you know that. We would ask you to do what we did for you. We may have policy differences, we have all kinds of differences, but our intelligence communities could keep our people safe if we had agreed just basically to do that. I did not get any handshake on that one, but nevertheless, when I'm talking about Ukraine and Zelensky, this guy has turned into Europe's Ronald Reagan in terms of Russia. And with Reagan standing, well, all that Reagan did through the 80s that brought down the wall. Here's Zelensky standing there, coming out of the entertainment business, basically saying, I'm not going to accept your offer to bring me out of this mess. I stand here with my people.
That's the quote of the year, isn't it? I don't need I need ammo, not a ride.
I need ammo, not a ride. That's going to be a quote that's out there a long time. And the way he has stepped up to mobilize his people, and the way just the next door neighbor saying, putting down, filling a vodka bottle with kerosene so they could Molotov cocktail against a tank or whatever, but to stand in the middle of the road. And this is incredible. I mean, these people are standing up for their country, even if they know they're going to die doing it. It is amazing, and I think it's probably amazing to the Russians, because I'm sure Putin thought he would just roll through there, and just like everywhere else, like in Georgia and everything else, Belarus, everything else he's done it without having to pull the trigger.
My favorite scene so far captured on video is the Ukrainian, and I'm going to assume this is real. I've seen it in 3 different places. The Ukrainian tow truck operator who hooked his tow truck up to a Russian tank and started to tow it away. And you can see the Russian tank operator running towards the tow truck. Of course, you don't know what happened to either the truck or the operator. What is happening right now in 2022 is perhaps not even the worst thing that Russia, or in this case, what I'm about to say, the Soviet Union, has ever done to Ukraine. And of course, I'm referring to the Great Famine of the early 1930s, when roughly 4 to 5 million Ukrainians were killed and millions more suffered from birth defects due to starvation and the starvation of their parents. What is it about Russia? And you alluded to it a few minutes ago when talking about Vladimir Putin. What is it about Russia and its need to dominate not only independent countries of Western Europe, but also its former members of the Soviet Union?
Yeah, Russia looked at, when it was USSR, controlling all those other countries, they were a major player. It was just U.S. versus Russia, global. But now, rising China, the rising states in NATO, in Europe, Russia, a declining power. Putin, I think, has seized this. He is obsessed about it. He wants to make it Mother Russia again. He's clawing away bit by bit by bit, Georgia, Crimea, the eastern banks of Ukraine, and it won't stop unless somebody stops it. I think what's happened here is that my hope, the ending result of this, bringing in Sweden, Finland, who didn't care before, the Baltics, others, the Swiss, puts up our wall of, we are not going to stand for this, and we're going to stand up for who we are. We're going to stand up for democracy. We're going to stand up for freedom, and people are joining this all over the world, exposing Russia. So this could be a historic change.
Russia has 11 time zones, so it shouldn't exactly inspire claustrophobia. But it seems to be, in just the makeup of Putin that he can't control himself. And I read a really good article just this afternoon in National Review, and I want to ask you about it. 2 points that the author made, and then we're going to move on and talk about other aspects of your incredible career. The article said the author asserted that America has 2 primary interests in the current situation. Number one is that no more players, no more countries enter the war as full belligerents. For example, Poland, that's who he mentioned. And second, that Vladimir Putin's regime suffer costs and penalties as a result of this invasion. Would you agree with these two? And do you have any others you would add?
Well, that's a very good question. I agree with that. I do believe that I was listening to General Petraeus this morning when he said Russia's getting their tail beaten off here. What we don't want, but the only, and we all are happy to see that happen. But we need to remember Russia is a nuclear nation, and we don't want some crazy man, some crazy head of Russia to basically push to the point where they think that they have nothing to gain and everything to lose if they don't push the button. I don't think that will happen because Russia would be totally wiped out in response. But nevertheless, I do think this could be a turning point for Russia's place as a bully in Europe and trying to undermine nations all over the world, not only in Europe, but even in the United States, trying to undermine democracy and saying our system is better. It's being exposed. It's not better.
I'm not going to ask you to grade the Biden administration's performance on this because it's unfolding and we want to be judicious here on the Leaders and Legends podcast. But as someone who's been in the White House, been in the Oval Office, been in the Situation Room, as international crises like this play out, what would you like to see the Biden administration do in the next 48 hours and the next fortnight?
Well, they're a little behind the curve in starting in terms of this. We could see this building up weeks ago in terms of, and if we had gotten more equipment, if we had taken more of a stand, if we had gotten our NATO people together as united, and Germany kind of stood in the way of that. If they had pushed harder on that, I think that it would have been better. It could have prevented that or put the Ukrainians in a better position. Nevertheless, I think the response that has been made now, relative to pushing for the SWIFT, a change of money that Russians no longer can do. I don't know. I don't know whether it was our influence on the SWIFT that caused them to freeze out the Russian money stored there in Switzerland. That was a huge move, and I just said it could have happened earlier and perhaps prevented what we're seeing right now. But at least at this particular point in time, I think we are getting our allies all in and all together. We need to unite as a free world. All the free countries of the world need to unite on this one and really push for it. And I think this administration believes that. Biden has had some criticism for not being strong enough on this, but we'll see how it plays out. But at least right now, everybody's awake.
I asked you about President Zelensky and Vladimir Putin and what was going on in their minds. You've known Joe Biden for at least 40 years, if not a few more. What do you think's going through President Biden's mind as this unfolds?
Well, I'm sure I don't think he was prepared for something like this. It just is interesting. Joe Biden and I are about the same age. He served in the Senate for a lot longer than I did, but I did serve with him, got to know him. I believe he's been loaded up with a lot of stuff here, and I look at myself and think about, what if I were president of the United States right now? It would be almost overwhelming. I don't have, I think I have still a lot of energy, but I don't have the energy to deal with a 24-hour 7-day-a-week crises all over the place and so forth and so on, just because of age. You're just not as strong as you are when you're in your 50s and 60s. And so I think Joe, it would have been much better for him to say, yeah, I've always had the ambition to be president of the United States, but maybe it's time for me to slow down a little bit. And I think some Democrats are, and maybe more than some, are basically saying, well, yeah, we wanted to win the election, but I'm not so sure our current president is up to dealing with all of these issues in the way that we would like to have it dealt with.
You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our very special guest is former United States Senator, former Director of National Intelligence, and former Ambassador to Germany, Dan Coates. We've been talking about Russia and Ukraine and the situation there, which has captivated everybody. And I'm going to ask one more question about that, and then we're going to move on to your career, because I want to ask you about the elephant in the room, perhaps, and that is the actions or non-actions or attitude of China, not just towards Russia and the Ukrainian situation, but also its covetous gaze, which is always towards Taiwan. What do you think China's up to?
I'm very concerned about this. President of China, has got to be sitting there watching all this. They're not partners with Russia. They can play Russia, but they're so much stronger than Russia. Xi has been obsessed with bringing Taiwan back into the mainland. They're Chinese. He ought to be giving second thought to the fact that here's a country like Ukraine that has just so far less capabilities than Russia, and Taiwan, which has a lot of capabilities. I sure wouldn't want to get in a situation like the Russians have gotten into. On the other hand, Taiwan is sitting out there, 30 miles away from the border of China. China's on the rise, and we're 7,000 miles away. I've been a strong supporter for Taiwan and our dealing with the Chinese in that regard. But she's got to be weighing, is this the pathway to take over Taiwan? Or maybe there's a different way of doing it and trying to work something out in terms of a two-state thing. But they did with Hong Kong, and then they pulled out their promise and now are ruling that. And that's probably what would happen with Taiwan. I just am concerned that stalwart supporter of ours, like Taiwan, manufacturing company, a lot of equipment that we use and all of that, and their freedom is at jeopardy. But what's happening in Ukraine may cause Xi to say, maybe that's not the right way to do it, or to try to do it. I hope it does. I hope that's what he's thinking. Or I was thinking if the Russians walked in there in one day, 24 hours, took control of the government, we might be able to do that with Taiwan. That didn't happen.
Your career in public service stretches back to the 1970s when you were working for a fellow named Dan Quayle. What made you decide to enter into public service? And when Dan Quayle took on and ended up defeating Birch Bayh in 1980, you ran and won Dan Quayle's congressional seat. So you started off in public service, and like a lot of people do, you eventually put your name on the ballot. What drove you to be in public service, and what drove you to make the leap that, hey, I can be a congressman from Indiana?
Robert, I never had those thoughts. I never thought I would be engaged in politics. I had just graduated from law school after leaving Army service. Went through IU law on the GI Bill. I was married. We had 2 children at that time. Graduated from IU law. We moved to Fort Wayne. I joined up with an insurance company, handling some of their real estate and a number of other issues for them. And we thought, okay, this is where we're going to be. This is the life we're going to have. It's nice. And here we like our city. We like our state. I like the company I work for. And that's our future. Well, along came, but I've always had an interest in following. I was a political science major. I've always followed it. Even as a kid, I was picking up the paper, 9 and 10 years old, 11 years old, reading about the Korea War, Dwight Eisenhower, and so forth. I was always engaged in that. So it wasn't a road that I thought I would take for job and marriage and kids and life, but it was something that always intrigued me. But I never made a decision to say, I'm going to go for that. So very unusual circumstances came about. The CEO of the insurance firm I worked for was Dan Quayle's finance chairman. And he knew of my interest in all the things that were going on. But he was, we both thought that, I'd be with this firm and this would be it. He approached me and he said, Dan Quayle called me. He was finance chairman, so they talked back and forth and so on. He said, I'm looking for somebody who has these qualifications, I'd like to have a law degree and solid Republican, conservative, and so forth and so on. A lot of people are putting a lot of pressure on me to this person, that person, and so forth and so on. Do you have anybody that you would know that you would recommend that maybe, would kind of take a recess away to help me get started and all that? It'd be my district guy who, and he came to me and he said, "Would you be interested in that?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I guess I would." I mean, I said, it's a unique opportunity, and so I talked to my wife about it, and she said, I said, but this is just more than 2 years. That's all. Just to help them get started and so forth. And he asked me to do this, if I would do this, and she was suspicious about all of that. Well, what after that? You go back to the other firm or what? And well, there I was, and a series of things have happened as you mentioned, and Dan Quayle. I served for him for nearly 4 years, and when I didn't keep out my promise to my wife that I'd only do it for one term, but I got very engaged in that. And then one day, Dan Quayle said, "I'm going to run if Governor Bowen doesn't run. He hasn't made up his decision yet. I'm going to try to be the person that they would pick to fill that seat." Because Bowen announced a lot of people were pushing him to be the run for the Senate. I picked up the newspaper, Journal-Gazette, one morning at the porch, and the headline said, "Beth Bowen has cancer. Governor withdraws from any run for the United States Senate." And I just said, "Oh my gosh! Dan Quayle is going to run for the Senate." He said, "You might want to try to run for my seat." And I said, "Whoa." So, it's not something I had dreamed of. It's not something I had worked through to get to a position to be. It was a situation, some events happened far beyond my control. Well, I'll be darned, all through my life, I haven't had a thought of moving to here or moving to do that or whatever. It's, the doors opened, and the issue for me was, do you want to step through or do you want to not do it? and I could not spend a lot of time. My wife and I are people of faith. I mean, we had prayed that if God wanted us to do something, opportunities came, we would go forward if we believed that was the right thing to do. And there's just things happened throughout my career where unexpectedly, I ran for Congress. Unexpectedly, I ran for the Senate. Unexpectedly, I never thought I'd be an ambassador. Unexpectedly, I didn't think I would run for the Senate again a second time. Unexpectedly, I didn't think I would be director of national intelligence. It's been a whirlwind of extraordinary experience. And so grateful for the support I've had from Hoosiers all along the way. I can't think of a state in the union that's better than Indiana, and it has been better to me. And with people who have supported me and surrounded me and helped me be able to do all the things that I've done. I give a great deal of credit to a lot of smart people that worked for me and helped me through difficult and good times.
You followed Dan Quayle when he probably at the time, certainly the biggest statewide political upset in Indiana history when Dan Quayle defeated three-time United States Senator Birch Bayh. Then 8 years later, you followed Dan Quayle again. He was selected by George H.W. Bush to be his running mate in 1988. The Bush-Quayle ticket won, was elected, which means that Dan Quayle's Senate seat is now open. He had been reelected in 1986, which I think at the time was the biggest margin in Indiana history. So Governor Orr has a Senate seat to appoint. Famously, and he talked about it when we interviewed him for the Leaders and Legends podcast, Mitch Daniels turned down this offer. Governor Orr then appointed you. So I have two quick questions. One is, what were you thinking when the offer was made? And was that a step that you wanted to take? That's A. And B, does former Vice President Quayle ever give you a hard time for just following him around everywhere?
Well, at one time, people said, Coach, you're in the tailwind of Dan Quayle. And you're just, he creates openings and you sweep in. And so, I don't know how you counter that. I said, no, I did this all myself. No, I didn't do it all myself. Like I said, that door opened unexpectedly. And it was the same with the appointment. Governor Orr said, you got elected by one guy, one vote. Everybody else has to work to get millions of votes to get into the Senate. And you got in there by one vote, and I made it. So, and then the ambassadorship came out of the blue from George W. Bush. As it going to Germany is probably one of the most interesting and rewarding 4 years of life that Marcia and I have ever had. We arrived there 2 days before my second day in office. There's ambassador hadn't even been sworn in yet. Was 9/11, and that changed everything in the world and changed my life. Changed the Germans' lives. Going through that, all of that just took me basically out of standing around and social things as a diplomat to just be totally full engaged representing the United States with the German military, the German intelligence, the German foreign policies. It was a stopping over point for everything going into the Middle East. And so we had at the time the largest embassy anywhere in the world, not anymore, but in terms of the number of people. In Germany, it was a staging place for all the troops going to the Middle East. We had 75,000 U.S. Army people, military people in Germany. All the air, ground, and everything was happening there. So, having served on the Armed Services Committee, that was very helpful to me in working with the militaries, our military, during the Iraq War.
What was it like as someone who served 2 years in the United States Army to be around not only that many soldiers, but that many military personnel as they were going off to war? My son Joshua did 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat infantryman. And, you are mixed with both pride and trepidation and some fear.
Yeah.
But you, with your military background, was it kind of a shot of adrenaline, for lack of a better term, and a shot of kind of patriotic pride to be around that many men and women who volunteered, not drafted, volunteered to serve their country post 9/11?
Yeah, you nailed it. It was one of the most important parts of my job, and one of the ones I felt was most rewarding. Works with generals and colonels and private guys all the way down, in terms of what was happening at the time. And so, yes, having served, I felt like I was part of that also, and that's something unique to an ambassador, unless something like 9/11 comes up or a war breaks out. Basically, very, very experienced generals and leaders were sent to Germany. It was a stepping stone to going all the way, and I enjoyed every minute of that.
You mentioned,
and was so proud, and I also had. Fortunately, I would go down to the hospital at Landstuhl with those Marines and Army and other coming back with terrible wounds, and walking through the hospital and the courage of those people. I want to get healed so I can go back and join my friends, join my guys in my team, and get back. And it was just heartbreaking to see some of them, but it was so rewarding to see these young guys whose courage you wouldn't believe, and how they were dealing with all these difficult things. Heartbreaking, but nevertheless, yes, I'd answer yes to your question.
Okay, Dan, just real quick. I know I want to be mindful of your time. We're at about 50 minutes.
Well, I'm enjoying this a lot.
You mentioned a few minutes ago talking about you weren't really sure that this was going to be your path, politics, elective office. You were appointed. What a lot of people don't know is that you were appointed in 88, but then you had to run again both in 1990 and 1992 statewide to keep your Senate seat. What were those campaigns like? And did you consider the arduous nature of the tasks ahead of you when you accepted the Senate seat from Governor Orr?
Well, you tapped into it. That was the toughest time. There was a 5-year period of time. I had a pretty good opponent going after me in my 5th election in the House of Representatives in 1988. And then moving to the Senate, because of the way the law is structured in terms of replacing an empty seat, I had 4 straight years of campaigning while acting as a senator. And so it was, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it was the hardest time of my life, and the most demanding time of my life in those 5 years. After that, I was flat out exhausted. I had just given it my all. I was trying to balance, getting home for the Little League game or the daughter's recital or so forth and so on. And it was a lot of flying back and forth to Washington. And I somehow wonder how I survived all that and came out whole. But that was the toughest time for sure.
And in 1988, you decided not to run for an additional term. Was that sort of accumulated wariness, along with just the toughness of the job and the wanting to spend more time with your family? Because, all of the political world was geared up for this titanic clash that was supposed to happen between you and Governor Evan Bayh. Are you happy with your decision looking back, that you're glad you stepped away and did other things?
Well, there are two reasons here. You named the first one. I was exhausted, number one. But secondly, if you go back and look at the previous campaigns, my first campaign, I committed to a restriction of how many times you could run, and so I had committed to that I wouldn't spend more than 12 years in the House, or if I went to the Senate, 12 years in the Senate. And I had eaten up that time, and I wanted to honor that commitment that I made to the Indiana people. It was interesting to me. Most people didn't care whether weren't pushing me to step down because I made that commitment. But it was a combination of the two. I mean, I was flat, worn out, and I had missed a lot of Little League games. I had missed a lot of art things that I wanted to do with the kids, and they were still at home, and that was the opportunity to do it.
I wanted to ask you about three people, and you can give as brief an answer, or you can make them one-word answers if you'd like, but three people with whom you served in the United States Congress, and just get your impression of them based on your interaction and how they served your fellow Hoosiers. First name I want to mention is Lee Hamilton.
I've had great respect for Lee Hamilton, a Democrat who ran up the middle and doing the right thing was much higher thing to reach for than politics. And Lee was straight up. I'm working with him today still. He just turned 90. We both have a position in the Lugar Hamilton school at IU. But from the very beginning, I realized he was the right kind of, even though he's in the other party, the right kind of person in the party, willing to step across the line, work together. And he and Dick Lugar, I think probably you'll say Dick Lugar next, formed really, really interesting. And, who would have thought that two members of the Congress, one in the Senate, one in the House, would hold the leadership of the foreign policy, dealing with our foreign policy, a Republican and a Democrat from Indiana. Everybody says, well, Indiana, yeah, it's a Midwest state. I mean, foreign policy, and two leaders like that who just dominated and were so creative and working together. That's a great tribute to the people of Indiana and to Lee Hamilton and Dick Lugar.
Richard Lugar.
Well, I think I just said it. It was, he laid a path of how to act in the Senate and how to deal with issues, and he was solid in terms of his lengthy experiences of governing, whether it was mayor or senator. He set a model for a lot of people in terms of how he dealt with people and his experience and knowledge of foreign affairs. So that was pretty hard to fill the shoes when I was there, but we worked together, and it was a good combination.
And what about Mitch Daniels?
Let me say one thing about Mitch Daniels. You mentioned Mitch Daniels. I mean, this guy is so creative. he was an amazing governor. He's amazing as a president of Purdue University. He worked for Reagan. One of the smartest guys I've ever known. I'm a big fan of his. And, well, I wish he had stayed in the presidential election. He would have made an amazing president.
Last but not least, probably my favorite storyteller of all time, Andy Jacobs Jr.
Well, it's another Democrat that I had respect for. I was in law school when Andy was a congressman. He stopped at one of the our classes and walked in, and the professor said, "Oh, yeah, the Congressman Jacobs. He's just and that was my first introduction to him. Sense of humor, someone everybody liked, a very likable person. He'll be remembered as a good congressman representing his state and his district in the way it should be done." So, yeah, I still believe that building relationships with your colleagues, trying to find what is best for your state, whether you're Republican or Democrat, can we come up with things that we can both support that benefit our state, not that necessarily benefit our next election or whatever, but what we can do for our state. And then we'll let the people of the state decide whether they want us to go back again. And Andy falls in that category. And of course, Dick Lugar and Lee Hamilton fall in that. And I tried to do that when I was in the Congress, and we had some successes.
So it's 2010. You're looking at yourself in the mirror, you're brushing your teeth, and you're thinking to yourself, am I going to run for the Senate again? And you do. And you win.
Well, but that's not how it happened. I had no interest or intent to run for the Senate again. Some other opportunities had opened their doors for me, and I was looking at that very, very seriously. I won't go into the details of it, but getting engaged in heading up a university and doing some other things. When I got a call from Senator Cornyn, who headed up the Republican campaign there for the Senate, and said, we've been scouring Indiana to get someone to run against Evan Bayh, and everybody's turned us down. And I thought maybe we might have missed somebody. And he said, could you name anybody I should be talking to? And I named off about 5 names. I said, every one of them turned it down. And he said, we're here. We don't even have a candidate. He said, there's this huge long pause, unless you would be willing to do that. And I said, oh my gosh, I know. I mean, I stepped down. I've had my time in the Senate. No, but I mean, your name is known, and we have to have somebody in there. And I said, well, let me check with my wife. I don't know if I can do that or not. I said, Marcia, you want to go back to Indiana? She said, I never wanted to leave. Because we moved with the kids to Washington because we wanted to be a family together. And so, I mean, people told me it was foolish to even think about that. But as it turned out, Evan did step down. I mean, it was a surprise that he announced that he didn't want to run. I think about 3 months, a month or two later, after I had said yes, and I thought, well, maybe he reached that point where I was, back in 1998, and so I could understand why at some point you're worn out or whatever, and you just don't want to do it again. But that opened the door for me to serve that one term of 6. And I went after. I failed miserably on the debt thing. I said we were spending too much money. We're going. into debt like crazy. This is going to all land in the end on our kids and our grandkids and on our country. And we got to stop spending so much money and so forth. And we almost got a deal with Obama. He walked away with it at the last minute to start that process. And now it's skyrocketed like crazy. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, Part 1 with former Indiana Senator Dan Coates. Part 2 will be posted. But let me thank, please, our sponsors, Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllis Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer.
All right, Robert. Obviously, I enjoyed it, or I wouldn't want to do it again.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.